we've been very upfront and very transparent about all of what we're doing. The DMO is required to publish the debt profile of the government regularly. I think it was just about 3 weeks ago that the last debt profile was published. And we always ensure that we are completely transparent about these things. We know about government borrowing, and when you look at it, part of the reason why that is the case is because, funding the budget at the moment, we've got to look at revenues. Now, if you look at tax revenues and oil revenues, in 2016, there was a huge problem because of course, that production of oil fell by almost 1 million barrels a day. We were losing something in the order of 60% of revenue on account of a lot of the militancy and all what was going on in the Delta. Now losing 60% of revenue, you're bound to find means, and that's why, and by borrowing, I'm talking about treasury bills. It is treasury bills that are issued, local treasury bills that are issued, and people buy those treasury bills. Now that has its own implications, but that's largely how government has funded its activities. There are those who argue that CBN should not be using intervention funds in agriculture. There are those who have that argument. Well, personally, I believe that to some extent, the interventions are important and should be used, especially in areas where government has its focus. But how much has the CBN expended on interventions in agriculture? So far, direct intervention in the Anchor Borrowers Program is in the order of 42 billion naira. Now that isn't, when you look at the overall size of even the budget, it's not a significant amount of money. The budget is about 7 trillion. So I think that, the issue of printing money, personally I just think it's absurd to suggest that money that's been printed is useful. Because even if that were the case, let's even say you have plenty of naira, it will put pressure on foreign exchange. If you had a naira, obviously people will be going to buy foreign exchange. And the rates will be rising, the rates won't be falling. So I think that, the logic of it, in my view, doesn't hold at all. With respect to due process being followed or not being followed, I think we just need to have all of the facts. I think we need to have all of the facts. At this point, I'm not so sure that one can make any sort of judgment as to whether due process is followed. Generally speaking, what happens with contracts, generally speaking, is that contracts will go through a process and are either approved by the President or by the Federal Executive Council. That's generally how these things are. But I do agree that there is a need for greater, and I think the point was made, that there's a need for greater transparency with respect to government contracts, such that you have a website where all of this, where government contracts are published and all of that. Now that is a good thing, but at the moment what you have, what the requirement of the law is that a government contracts that go through the BPP, that's the Bureau of Public Procurement, must be advertised in 2 national dailies. Now, what is the national daily then becomes a question, because there are 2 newspapers that are frequently used that are not necessarily well known, but of course the information is always available at the BPP. But the 2 national newspapers, in fact, many times that has been a subject of criticism, that we can have publications in major national newspapers. But the constraint for that also is cost. And also say that will increase the cost, especially for small players, that it will increase the cost of contracts also. Because if you have to advertise a newspaper as a full page of a newspaper these days is coming close to $1 million. But I do agree that the website will be the perfect answer. And one of the things that we've been doing with the government, if some might recall, that I signed an executive order while I was acting president on ensuring that all of the websites are up, that all of the websites of our ministries and parastatals are up. And if you've been tracking the work of PEBEC, which is our Enabling Business Environment Council, if you've been tracking their work, they've been looking at each MDA, each parastatal, and trying to find out how well they're doing with respect to putting up their websites and all of that, and actually grading them. I think we'll come to it. I think we'll come to that as we go along. And we'll probably be able to arrive at a point where we're able to put out all of this information on the website of the BPP, that's the Bureau of Public Procurement. I think there's also the question of whether the anti-corruption effort is reactive. I think Ishiem said that it is reactive and could be more proactive. And I agree that, yes, we could do a lot more in terms of proactivity, but what is it that we're doing in terms of being proactive? One is that as soon as the government came into office, we started with the TSA. Now the TSA, as you know, is a way of ensuring that all government revenues can be cited at once. And so we insisted that government revenues will go to the central bank, and most MDAs complied almost immediately. Today, practically, there's almost, or at least 90% compliance with the TSA. So it is possible for me or possible for Mr. President at any point in time to ask for information or to get information. In fact, we get information on a regular basis. What is the state of government revenues? Who has what? And we can tell all of that, immediately. Now, before then, before the TSA, you found situations where MDAs, government agencies, would put money in a bank, right? And nobody would know of the existence of the money. And they would fix money at any rate, they could fix money at 2%, and all manner of corrupt activities were going on. And it was almost impossible. There are MDAs that had 40, 50 different accounts. As a matter of fact, when we started the TSA policy, we literally had to find banks, the CBN had to really sit on the banks and find them, and in some cases even make allegations of crime against them, to get them to disclose what they were hiding in the various accounts. So I think that that was the first step, in my view. And then we of course have the efficiency unit, which is a unit under the Ministry of Finance, which ensures that government expenditure is efficient. Basically looking at the MDAs, going in there to check what is going on. And we also have on the spot, audits as part of the efficiency unit. And by and large, what we try to do is to ensure that everyone recognizes that it's not going to be business as usual. You can be checked anytime. There are instant audits and all of that. And that has helped a great deal in controlling corruption and saving a great deal of government revenues. So in very many senses, the approach, especially within within the scope of government expenditure, is to ensure that we have layers and layers of accountability, so that people don't just escape, scrutiny. And we continue to ensure that there is that scrutiny. Of course, we have the whistleblowers program, as you are well aware. I'm sure that every one of us knows about that program. So that people within MBAs and people within even civil society can come up and tell us what they've heard or what they know. And that has led to several discoveries. As you know, there are several, in fact, some of the information that you're aware of is that several of the whistleblowers have been paid their 5% percentages and all of that for 5% fees for making discoveries of money or people who are engaged in corrupt activities of one kind or the other. So we have, I think quite a number of proactive measures. It's impossible for you to understand how deep this issue is. And just look at scale. You have 30 billion US dollars in your reserve. Maybe just pulling the military expenditure alone in a period of 4 years, almost $15 billion is unaccounted for. Now that's almost half of your reserve. There's nowhere in the world where that happens. And somebody just says, well, by now we should have forgotten about that. This is money. This is money that's supposed to have been used for infrastructure. There is no thing, you can't point to any major infrastructural achievement. When oil was at $100 to $115 a barrel, you can't point to a single major infrastructure project. Where is it? all of that money somehow disappeared. And when that happens, it is then the business of the government that comes to not only account for all of that in terms of deficits in infrastructure, deficits in everything. Look at salaries in the States. Oil was going at $100 to $115. When we got into office, 2/3 of the states were owing salaries 6 months and over. 2/3 of the states. Now, if you have that kind of situation, you are bound to then begin to look at bailouts, loans, and see how you can support the states. Because the federal government only has this territory called Abuja. The rest of Nigeria is, that is the Federation of Nigeria. So if the Federation of Nigeria is suffering, the states are suffering, then it means that the economy of Nigeria is suffering. So it's the business of the federal government to support that. But I think that the sheer extent of corruption, the sheer magnitude of the corruption, I don't think that and I make this point of this, I don't think civil society has shown the outrage that one expects or the consistency in tracking these issues. I don't think. People come to me and say, how come there's been no conviction? Where are the campaigns? Where are those who are saying, call these guys out? Make sure that these guys are not able to spend their ill-gotten wealth. Make sure that these guys who have been named and shamed remain named and shamed. I don't see that outrage, and I think it's an important issue because this is, in my view, the most important problem that this country has. People talk about all manner of things. People say, oh, look, once we restructure, everything will be fine. But if we get the best restructuring arrangement and we still tolerate the levels of corruption that we tolerate, I don't see how we're going to make much progress. I think, we really need to address the issue of corruption. And I really believe that the duty of civil society must be to be an active participant, to be fully engaged in the anti-corruption fight. Sarah wanted to know about basic primary health care and the 1%, the 1% of the Health Act, which is meant to be for primary health care. Now, let me just say very quickly that we'll continue to budget incrementally for health care. And primary health care, as you know, is one of the, in fact, it's a major program of the Ministry of Health today. The 2017 budget is 304 billion. The budget for 2017 is 304 billion, which is a considerable improvement over 2016, which I believe is something in the order of about 280 billion or so. So we have, it's an incremental budget. But for me, the chief thing is national health insurance, because we need to fund the healthcare system. And you can't fund the healthcare system by budgeting alone. And that's one of the reasons why the Ministry of Health has been mandated to ensure that the national health insurance scheme is made to work. Now, how does that work? Because really, you cannot, the only way to fund healthcare is if everybody or the vast majority of people are chipping in, no matter how small, and government puts in a seed, which is really the way that our NHIS scheme was initially designed. But the only way to really fund at the levels that we should fund is if we're able to get that, if we're able to get the funding from national health insurance. And if you look at it, I mean, what we're doing at the moment, when you even provide 300 billion, 350 billion, etc., a lot of that depends on the revenues. A lot of that depends on how much you're actually able to realize in revenues. So it's far too dependent on government revenues, whereas national health insurance is the way to go, and which is the path that we have adopted. It is to go by way of national health insurance in order to fund the healthcare system. Bring back our girls. Ayo wanted to know about when the rest of the girls will come back. Well, let me say that, again, that the government, of course, is committed to ensuring that all of the girls return and that they return safely. And all through, as soon as we came into office, this remained, a front burner issue for us. It's an ongoing, thing. And every security briefing on a weekly basis, we're tracking what exactly is going on. A lot of the sorts of negotiations that go on in these hostage situations are, of course, negotiations that cannot be discussed openly, and one cannot, as it were, give a day-by-day or blow-by-blow account of what's going on. But I think that it's important to just realize that the government is committed to ensuring that all of the girls who are still out there, and several other persons who have been taken hostage by Boko Haram, are released. So there is a very firm commitment to ensuring that the girls are returned as soon as possible. National unity. First, let me say that there is, on the part of the federal government, as has been repeated several times, commitment to national unity. And of course, as you know, the president has made this commitment several times, and what I believe we have to first, what I think we need to accept is also that a lot of complaints, that are made and all of that, a lot of the pressure, and I think I'll come to that when I'm taking some of the questions some of the other questions that have been raised, is that when people say marginalization, and people say they've been marginalized, in a good number of cases, we're not looking at facts. It's almost a perception, a feeling. It's not facts. Usually when you look closely at the facts, that's not the case at all. When you look closely at the facts always show something entirely different. And I'll just give one example, and I gave this example when I met with some of the leaders during the course of the interactions that we had with leaders of the various ethnic groups and all that. I was saying that there was a meeting where some leaders of National Assembly members were speaking to the president about the appointments of ministers in the cabinet. And one of the chief points that they raised that, look, we don't have senior, of course you know that there are senior ministers and if you like junior ministers. A minister of state is regarded as a junior minister, and substantive minister is the senior minister. And these people were complaining that they didn't have any senior ministers from certain states that had made, that they felt, look, in terms of population, in terms of even contribution to the electoral success of the party, had done so well. And they raised this, they said, look, Katsina State has no senior minister. That's the president's state. Kaduna State has no senior minister. Sokoto State has no senior minister. Even Yobe has no senior minister. Meanwhile, some states in the southeast, and they made the comparison, almost every state in the southeast is a senior minister except one. And that is the Minister of State for Education. Every other person is a senior minister. And I made those comparisons. Now, here are people saying we'll be marginalized in the appointment of ministers. And we deserve to be heard. We deserve to be heard. So somebody else comes and says, well, if you look at the service chiefs, there's nobody from our own zone. But time was, barely 3 years ago, when in that same setup of service chiefs, there was also the same kind of inequity, if you like, in the same setup of service chiefs. So everybody can argue. It just depends on the way you want to look at this. Everybody can make their own argument, and the arguments are strong. I think what is important is for us to recognize that, at all times, all we can do is make an attempt to balance. That's what you can do. At best, all you can do is make an attempt to balance. And even in the process of balancing, we also have to be careful. There are many of us who take the view that merit should always trump these affirmative action type things. And many of us who take that view. And it's unfortunate that today, when you look at a list of people, the first thing people ask is, where is the person from my own zone? Rather than, are these guys even competent to do the work? It's such a pity because, hey, here we are faced with a situation where even the best of us are now tribal warlords sitting under our tribal camps, the best of us. All over the place, everybody has become an advocate for tribe as opposed to merit. Meanwhile, when we want to play, when we want to win, we know how to win. We want to play football. Those of us who are football fans here, nobody asks, is there a representation from the southwest? Is there one from the northeast? No. If all of them are from the northeast, if all of them are from the southeast, nobody cares so long as they win. And that's the way we should look at government. That's the way we should look at government and all of that. Unfortunately, it's come to the point where every appointment is scrutinized very closely on the basis of zone, faith, whatever ethnicity the person belongs to, and we're getting narrower and narrower. My respectful view is that we must promote some kind of national consensus that says, let us even first determine merit. Let's look at what these guys can offer first, and then all our affirmative action type things come after that. Because really, I think we're really becoming, everyone is going into their tribal tents and fighting from their tribal tents. Okay, the existing regime, I think this was also Ayo's question, for NGO regulation, investigations of these allegations of funding going on. Now, any sort of investigation of allegations of funding terrorism or any such thing, investigations that are carried out usually by the State Department or by the office of the NSA. So these are the kinds of, obviously they're not publicized until some findings are made and all that. And these investigations, of course, go on all the time. Once there are suspicions, once there are allegations, these investigations go on. You said also that there's a sense of urgency is lacking, that this year's budget is slow. Well, I'm sure that you follow very closely all of the interactions with the National Assembly on budgeting and all that. 2016 budget was submitted in December. 2017 budget, was submitted in December. And expected that at the beginning of the financial year it will be passed. But of course, all that happens, the interactions and all of the engagements with the National Assembly and how long that takes. I mean, it took the length of time that you saw, and that's the nature of our democracy. There's nothing you can do about that. All you do is submit a budget. Once you submit a budget, it's no longer in your control. We worked hard at it. We reached a consensus with the National Assembly, as you know, as respecting certain aspects that we felt the National Assembly had, where we felt the National Assembly had removed sums of money and placed elsewhere, etc. We agreed that there will be a environment as a basis for signing the budget. Well, we're still on that matter. We're still arguing back and forth. But the next initiative with the federal government took was that beginning next year, that's 2018, we'll have a budget from January to December, right? And so we're submitting this year's budget in October. That's the next year's budget, 2018 budget in October. Now that's an initiative which we agreed with the National Assembly that we will pursue, and we are working on that. We're going to submit it in October. We'll submit the 2018 budget in October, and we hope that by December we'll have the 2018 budget ready. Now, a lot of these processes are slow because, of course, as you know, it's not just the legislature. I mean, it's not just the executive, but it's also the legislature. And really, all the executive can do is propose a budget, and then it's left in the hands of the legislature to determine when that process will be concluded and finally signed. David wanted to know about the disabilities bill, and let me say first that I cannot tell you exactly where that is in the National Assembly today, and I made a note of it that I will find out what exactly is going on with the bill. But the SIP specifically targets disabled persons. The SIP specifically does. As a matter of fact, that is one of the very important segments of vulnerable groups that we target. So it's not correct to say that the SIP doesn't involve or is not, doesn't take into account disabled people. Mohammed wanted to know about the Y Brigade and why the Y Brigade was no longer functioning. Frankly, I don't know. I actually thought that I didn't realize that there was still a Y Brigade since those years. But again, this is something that I'll find out. You know, we have charged the National Orientation Agency with taking a look at how we can, you know, truly go through a process of orientation, especially of young people and all that. And I know that quite a few civil society groups have been involved in these civic responsibility type initiatives and all that. But I do agree entirely that we need to teach values a lot more, and that we need to sensitize, especially, you know, from young people in primary school, secondary school, and all of that. And people genuinely need to understand what the ethos of not just the government, but what our ethos ought to be. Where do we stand on the ethical issues? Where should we stand and all of that? And I agree that the National Orientation Agency can do a lot more, and certainly the government itself can do a lot more in terms of doing this. And really, it's an engagement which I really thought would have gone farther with, and unfortunately we haven't. But I agree that it's an area where we need to do a lot more work. Tokumbo Mumni wanted to know about what we're doing with recovered funds. Now, let me first say that in the budget, in the 2016 budget, we have a line for recovered funds as a revenue stream. We have a line for 350 billion, you know, in the 2016 budget. I think it's 350 also in the 2017 budget. So the whole idea is that this is supposed to be funding for the budget, and there's a line created. Now, there are those who have argued that it is better for us to say this road was built from the proceeds of crime, you know, to actually do a road or whatever it is, and say this particular road was built from, you know, recovered funds, or this house, or this, you know. And that has also received a great deal of traction even within the Federal Executive Council. And I'm sure it's something that we'll probably consider doing, just so as to demonstrate that, look, this is money that was found and this is where. But I chair the Assets Recovery Committee. There's an Assets Recovery Committee which consists of the Attorney General, the EFCC, the ICPC, IG of Police, you know, the whole, but the Minister of Finance. And what we've tried to do is, first of all, we have an account with the CBN. There's a CBN account that's designated for recovered funds. So when a fund is, and you see, sometimes there's the sense that the fund has been recovered where it has only been discovered. So for example, if we find that the person has in their account 100 million naira or whatever that we suspect is proceeds of crime, you still have to go through a process of interim forfeiture and all of that. In many cases where it is still in court, we really cannot describe this as recovered because the person is still contesting the account, the amount and all that. So sometimes we have to distinguish between what is actually recovered and what, you know, is the subject of some forfeiture proceedings and all that. So I'm sure that very soon we're going to make another statement as to exactly how much in terms of, you know, real estate, cash and all of that for both foreign and local that have been recovered and are contained now in the CBN's account, which we designated for that purpose. Cynthia wanted to know about youth participation in politics, and first, let me say that I fully support the legislative proposal to have, you know, that demonstrates, that shows that, in my view, I think it shows that everyone really wants young people to get involved in politics and all that. But let me just say that this business of youth participation in politics is something that you cannot really legislate. And I believe that, yes, it's good to set the thresholds where they are, you know, but I think that those who are interested in politics, those who are interested in governance, must show that interest and they must participate. It's important for people to also understand that there's some kind of process required, so that one just doesn't assume that, well, at the age of 25, I should become the Minister of Education because I have some bright ideas of education. I mean, there are some processes, and one of those things, and I think that on my part, and on the part of several of us who are in government today, there is a process of bringing in very many young people. I have in my office, I'm not even sure the exact number now, but I have in my office, practically everybody who works with me is under 40. I have a few dinosaurs, but most of them, everybody is definitely under 40. My party, those who work on my power advisory team, who are special advisors, special assistants on power, practically every one of them is under 35. And these are, I was saying for my SIP team, and that's the case with many, many ministers. If you look at the assistants, if you look at their special assistants, if you look at those who work with them, most of them are definitely very young people. And I think that that's the kind of training that's required. I worked as a special assistant to an attorney general, so the federal attorney general, years ago. I was 31 when I was appointed special assistant. And I worked, and in some senses, it shaped my thinking about public service. I think that is something that works very well, where people who are interested begin some kind of engagement with government, some kind of engagement with civil society, or even the political parties. Some of those who work with us at the moment are people who, during the elections, work actively with us, either as social media activists or people who design policy or thought through stuff. I think that, as with anything, one has to demonstrate interest, and really, if you're interested and you're participating at either at the party level or participating even at civil society level, one gets mentioned, one gets known, and all of that. But I think there's a lot more. It requires a lot more than just saying anybody over the age of, anybody from 21 up can be a legislator or can be president or whatever. I think it requires a lot more. I think that people have to, young people also have to demonstrate some kind of interest in this. And again, I believe also that political parties, we in the APC have a youth wing, which is very, very vibrant, by the way, extremely vibrant. In fact, the first people to abuse us when we were on our APC youth, in fact, sometimes I think of banning them because they're far too loud and making too much noise and complaining all the time. But this is the role that they play, and they're very, very active, very outspoken. So I think that there's plenty of room for youth engagement. But again, the budget for youth development. Now, let me just say that it's not. If you look at the SIP, that's the special, that's the social investment program. There's a lot of money there that addresses questions concerning youth development, especially technology. Even the entire NPower program, where we're engaging 500,000 graduates into the program and training 500,000 graduates and all of that. That program is a youth program, because really, it's possibly the largest youth program yet, where we're engaging that number. At the moment, we've engaged about over 200,000. We opened the portal again to engage another 300,000. Now that's a youth program. So if you're looking at the budget of youth sports and youth development as an indicator of where whether government is spending money on youth or not, that would be wrong, because really there are all sorts of places where you ought to be looking also, including the budget of the SIP, which is, as I said before, possibly the largest that the country has ever had. Ken wanted to know about non-state security actors and what their role will be in community policing. We're looking at the community policing model, and at the last security meeting, which is possibly about 3 weeks ago or so, we had charged the states with with developing that model. Now, what we've done, for example, in states that have non-state actors, for example, Lagos State. They are introducing their own model. They are telling us this is how we're going to work. The IG gives a general framework, which is our community policing framework. But every state is then required to say how they intend to engage. Now, there are all sorts of loose ends here and there. You know, for example, if a non-state, there are those who say that non-state actors have to be properly identified. We have to have tags for them. We have to have records and all of that. Excuse me. And I think that that's important. We have to have proper records and all that. But then there are issues around funding. The state insists that if you're going to do anything, you can't give us an unfunded mandate. We have to fund. The federal government has to fund this and fund that. So there are still arguments back and forth. But what I think we're seeing, though, is an active collaboration between the federal and the state government on trying to resolve these issues. But we do not think that there is any option to community policing. And we think that, and as far as the government also, we also believe very strongly in the state police concept and the concept of the state police. And we think that that's, community policing is, in some senses, democratizing policing, allowing devolution of power so that the states and local governments can also participate in one way or the other. And also, of course, civil society can also participate in policing. So that's the state of play with that. The first order, how is a cake and all that. Well, I'm not entirely clear as to what that first order actually says, and maybe if you supplied it, I might be able to comment a bit more, but I'm not familiar with it at all. So then Funke, I think I've addressed that question that Funke asked about women on boards and all that. Jude says, is it possible to have, that's Jude, not Jude alone, this is the other Jude. Okay. Is it possible to have a budget sent in good time? Yes, it is. And I think I've also pointed out that we are sending this one in October because we want to start in January to December. But sending the budget in good time, as I pointed out, isn't the end of the matter. As a matter of fact, it's only the beginning. What sometimes is a rather long journey. States running without open budgets, I haven't paid any attention whatsoever to that issue, and again, it's something that I'll look at. I've always assumed that the states, I just hear the states reading their budgets. I also get copies of budgets of the states, but whether this is open to any kind of scrutiny or not is not something I've paid any attention to. But I think it's really worth paying attention to. Part of the interaction we had with the states when we were supporting them with the budget support and the bailout is that they have to, there's a fiscal program. They need to, we require them to do certain things in the fiscal program. And one of the things we required them to do was, first of all, to ensure that their payroll was cleaned out so they had a proper payroll. Secondly, we expected them to show us revenue figures, what they were getting revenues. We expected them to show us how they were spending money and all that. We had a template which they had to fill out. But the issue of whether they engage with the public or engage with them is not something that we put into that at all. I think it's really worth considering. So it's certainly something that's worth considering. I talked about the National Open Procurement website, and I think I've dealt with that already. Faith wanted to know about the NATI Act. Again, I'm sure that this is something I would have to ask Zainab. Of course, Zainab Ahmed was the former director. She's now Minister for National Planning. She's the one who has been paying attention to what is going on with the NATI Act. And Waziri Adio, who is the current director. But I really haven't followed that. I'll try and find out if you would be able to catch up with me. But I really haven't paid any attention to it at all. But I'm sure that because this is something that Zainab is very keen on. That's the Minister of State for Budget and National Planning, because she was the former director there, the former, I think, Executive Secretary, yes, Executive Secretary. Mike Ego wanted to know plan to boost the image, proactive engagement on corruption. I think I've talked about that at length. I agree with practically all that you said about that. The truth of the matter is that the only way that we can burnish our image, or the only way we can really do anything about our image, is to improve governance and improve the processes locally to ensure that people see that there is consequence for corruption, there is consequence for wrongdoing, to ensure that our institutions respond, they are strong enough to respond. And of course, I'm sure you are familiar with the recent announcement by the Chief Justice of Nigeria about establishing special courts to prosecute or to try cases of corruption and all that. I think it's a very significant development, and it does show that the judiciary itself is taking up that responsibility of the whole anti-corruption, the whole anti-corruption struggle. I think it's a very good thing indeed that what the Chief Justice is trying to do, because that means that there will be dedicated courts. It's not that they will be created by law. This will be dedicated courts within, for example, the Federal High Court will have some judges who are dedicated to corruption cases. The Federal Capital Territory, the High Court of Federal Capital Territory, State High Court will also dedicate some courts. And I think that will certainly help a great deal to move the cases along. As you know, several of the cases are stalled, and there are those who argue all the time that that people have, people are let out on bail. So, very frequently you find that somebody who is stolen a large sum of money is walking the streets, attending parties and having a great time. And of course, for the large majority of Nigerians, people are wondering, how is this allowed to happen? I see very frequently people comparing the man who stole a phone and who is beaten to death to a man who stole $1 billion, gets himself a couple of good SAs, and he's released on bail. He's seen at all the social functions having a great time, and then he delays his cases internally. And I think that that's really part of the outrage that I talked about. I think that somehow, there are those who will say, well, everybody has their fundamental rights, they ought to be let out on bail, they ought to wander around the streets and all of that. But I think that if we are at least sufficiently outraged about it, especially about delays, the long delays in handling these cases, and many of these delays are deliberate, dilatory tactics introduced in many cases by lawyers who want to hold the cases up for as long as possible and hope that there will be a change of policy, change of government and those kinds of things, and that this will eventually lead to the cases being forgotten or being compromised one way or the other. But I think that we are in a good place, and I'm very excited about what the judiciary is trying to do, and we're supporting them in every way, and I'm sure that we'll get some results very soon. I think it was Benson who wanted to know whether election security management, will security agencies be allowed to do their work. I think that our track record so far has shown that the federal government is not going to interfere in the process, in the electoral process. And the president has made that pledge more than once. I think that he is somebody who takes a very personal view of this issue of free electoral process. When the first set of elections were going to take place in 2016, he called the security agencies together, and I'm sure that many, because it was also in the press, and I attended the meeting, where he said to them that he did not want any security agent to take the side of the federal government or what he felt was the side of a political party. He made it extremely clear to them and said that what he wanted was for every Nigerian to be protected well enough and to be secure enough to be able to vote. This is a position that he has taken, and for him, it's almost a deeply personal issue, having contested elections 3 times, gone to as far as the Supreme Court on all those 3 occasions, fighting for his rights, within the democratic system and going through the whole. And he felt, all of those times, he felt that if the system had worked well, if there had not been cheating or rigging, people would have been able to accept the results of the elections as being free and fair. So for him, it's a deeply personal matter, and I don't think that we need fear at all that security agencies will do anything other than obey the commander-in-chief's the commander-in-chief's instructions, as he said. Abiodun wanted to know about bailout. How do we track the bailouts? As I said, we have a template for a governance template for all of the bailout funds and all that. And everybody is required, all the states are required to comply with that template. Now, what we may not be able to say categorically, for example, when we gave the Paris Club the funds, we insisted that a certain percentage must be dedicated to salaries. Now, to the extent that you cannot control how states spend all their money, I mean, just if you give a loan, really you can't say that the only way that you can disburse this loan is X. I mean, especially with governments, you've got to still give some room. But we've tried very hard to ensure that percentages that we've agreed are paid as salaries, are paid out as salaries. But don't forget that some states have owed salaries for years. For example, Benue State is owed something because prior to the government of the current government, I think it was almost something in the order of 40 billion or so was owed. Now, how much do states get? Many states did not pay salaries at all. Primary school teachers' salaries didn't pay. There are huge debts. There are some states that have inherited huge debts, and paying off those debts is extremely difficult. So there are some that, obviously could do a lot more, and one of the things that even at the last NEC meeting is one of the issues that was spoken about how to use resources to ensure that people are paid, especially workers are paid and all that. But then, as you know, the argument is always that, well, look, workers are a certain number. Then you have the millions others who are not workers in the system, and you still have to provide infrastructure for them. You have to provide good roads, you have to provide hospitals and all of that. So, and for many states, all they get from federal allocation is not usually enough to even pay workers' salaries. So it really is quite complicated for someone. But I agree entirely that many of the states can do so much better in terms of payment of salaries. How do you track tobacco control? There is nothing I can say about that. I know that, personally, I know that the tobacco control regulation hasn't gone far enough, and again, this comes from my previous life as a tobacco control activist. I sued the tobacco companies, I think, in 9 states of federation, on this issue of tobacco control and all that. I don't think the legislation has gone far enough. And I think that some of the regulation, some of it will take quite a bit of tracking. What some of us expected will be what the sort of legislation that puts the onus on the tobacco companies, because really it's extremely difficult for government to put out the resources to regulate tobacco. In other places, what happens is that the onus of ensuring that tobacco is regulated is put on the tobacco companies because they have the resources. But I mean, if government is expected to put out all the resources to start looking after all of these issues, it's usually very difficult to work it. In other places, tobacco companies are required they're required to do certain things that ensure that they themselves are more or less the regulators, because otherwise, government simply it will be extremely difficult for government to have the resources do much about this. But anyway, that's for tobacco control.